Okay, so what is art but a series of questions disguised as images?
Mm,
I saw that in a review, and it just really,
yeah,
it really stuck with me. And I think it's really at the heart of what we're talking about today.
totally.
We're going deep into the world of Bob Camblin,
I love
who was
this.
born in 1928 and
Okay.
passed away, we're not quite sure,
Right.
sometime after 1991.
Right.
But he was this really enigmatic figure and left behind thousands of artworks that are
Thousands.
scattered.
Yeah.
And so his rare pieces are highly sought after.
Well, and what I think is so fascinating right from the get-go is that you have this paradox where you have someone who is so deeply respected
Right.
by his peers,
Yeah.
and yet he's kind of elusive to the broader public.
Right.
And this vast body of work is not neatly cataloged, which I think really contributes to kind of this compelling mystery.
Right. And to unpack that mystery for you,
Right.
we have a lot of different sources that we're looking at today.
Okay.
So we have some direct quotes from Camblin himself. We
Okay.
have some biographical details.
Sure.
We have his exhibition history, which is extensive.
Okay.
We have a YouTube video that we're going to be discussing.
Right.
A transcript from where they were analyzing his watercolor Breaker's Drive.
Okay.
And then excerpts from books that feature his art.
Okay.
And then also some just historical information.
Awesome.
So our mission in this deep dive
Yeah.
is to extract kind of like the key insights into Camblin's art
Yeah.
and the philosophy and the recurring themes you see in his incomplete works, which is
Yep.
the series of books that he's probably best known for.
Yeah, and just kind of distill it down in a way that's accessible and understandable to someone who's like,
Right.
hey, I want to know about this guy,
Yeah.
but I don't have time to read all of this stuff.
Exactly.
Just give me the meat and potatoes.
Yes.
You know?
Give us the TLDR.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start out by just going through his early life
Sure.
and influences that kind of set him on the course to becoming an artist.
Yeah.
So his parents were both artists. So he was exposed to a lot of different mediums growing up from a young age.
That's so important. I think just that early and constant exposure to all of those mediums. I
Yeah.
think that's probably key
Yeah.
to understanding his artistic development.
Yeah, it was innate. It wasn't like he discovered this later.
Exactly.
And he grew up in Ponca City, Oklahoma,
Okay.
which during that time was,
Now, what was this?
this was during the Marlin era. So there was an oil boom and there was this real sense of grandeur.
Okay.
Think of the Marlin Estate, which is this enormous mansion filled with art from all over the world.
Wow.
But then the 1940s came and there was a period of decline. And also you have the Pioneer Woman statue, which is this major landmark that Marlin commissioned. And it's this prominent figure.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is Camblin, he incorporates the Pioneer Woman
Okay.
and his mother, Viva.
Okay.
Into his artwork, he uses the initials VV
Oh, interesting.
as kind of a nod to them.
So you see like this kind of incorporation of these local symbols,
Yes.
interwoven with this personal, like, I'm going to put my mom in here.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and then when the Wizard of Oz came to Ponca City in 1938,
Huh.
that was like a huge thing for him.
I bet.
You can imagine the visual storytelling, the fantasy elements.
Right.
It probably really sparked something in him.
Sure.
And you can maybe see that influence in his later work
Yeah.
when he's playing with illusion and transformation and stuff.
Yeah.
And he met Forrest Harrisberger in high school.
Okay.
And they were friends for 66 years.
Wow. That's amazing.
So they had this really long friendship and
Yeah.
shared good vibes and a love of drawing.
I think those deep and lasting friendships are often overlooked.
Yeah,
They really do serve as support systems for artists.
absolutely.
To share experiences, to have a sounding board for ideas.
Yeah,
It can really shape their journey.
yeah, for sure. And so after high school, they both enlisted in the Air Force Reserve. And they were later activated for the Korean War.
Gotcha.
But the GI Bill was a huge thing for them because it allowed them to go to the Kansas City Art Institute, which is KCAI.
Okay.
And so Harrisberger actually recalls that Camblin was always reading
Okay.
paperback fiction
Really?
during their art classes.
So, like, not just art history books.
Yeah, he was constantly absorbing
Right.
ideas and narratives and stuff.
That probably really contributed to the depth and complexity we see in his later work.
Absolutely. And so he was really into Ralph Waldo Emerson,
Okay.
the I Ching,
Right.
and haiku and haiga.
Now, what is a haiga?
A haiga is basically, it's a Japanese art form
Okay.
that combines like haiku poetry with a related image.
Gotcha.
And it's really about simplicity.
Okay.
So simple forms evoking like profound observations and stuff.
So you can definitely see the influence there, like
Yeah.
Emerson's individualism,
Right.
and then the I Ching
Yeah.
talking about change and interconnectedness, and then haiku, this kind of like minimalist aesthetic.
Yeah.
Simple but deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then even during the Korean War,
Okay.
when they were stationed in California,
Right.
they would get together and sketch the coastline.
Oh, cool.
They were always making art.
Yeah.
And then he received a Fulbright scholarship to study in Italy for a year.
Wow.
And that was like a...
Italy, of course, being kind of this historical center of
Nice.
Western art.
Yes.
So, I mean, just being exposed to that kind of heritage
Right.
would have just really expanded his...
Yes. He said that he was mesmerized by the European grandmasters.
Right.
The Impressionism.
Yeah.
He even called Venice his Emerald City.
Oh, wow.
He loved it there. But two places that he really was taken by were the Uffizi Gallery in Florence
Okay.
and the Catacombe Cappuccini, which are the burial catacombs
Oh, wow.
in Palermo. And he said that the mummy imagery that he saw
Okay.
in Palermo,
Right.
it really stayed with him, almost haunted his memory.
Interesting.
And you see that kind of abstract figuration throughout his work.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty stark contrast, right?
Yeah.
The Uffizi,
Yeah.
this beautiful Renaissance art,
Yeah.
and then the Capuchin catacombs.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he was drawn to both of those.
Yeah, and then he really loved Botticelli and did his own rendition of The Birth of Venus.
Mhm.
And it was a tribute to KPFT radio
Okay.
in Houston. And he saw KPFT as this like Neoplatonic symbol of love,
Okay.
especially the love of rock and roll
Okay.
for its listeners.
Okay.
And he also did an interpretation of Primavera.
Okay.
And his Flora in Primavera, she's wearing a mask.
Okay.
And the painting's full of this hidden imagery like hearts,
Wow.
electrons. There's even a Hygge in there
Oh, wow.
and a red exclamation point.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's almost as if he's kind of playfully,
Yes.
but also deeply intellectually
Yeah.
engaging with art history. He's not just like, oh, I like Botticelli. He's like, I'm going to reinterpret this,
Yes.
and I'm going to embed my own contemporary references
Yeah.
and my own personal symbolism,
Yes.
and I'm going to dare you to kind of
decode it. Yes.
quote it.
So his talent was really recognized early on. So pieces from his Fulbright period
Okay.
were included in some pretty major exhibitions, including the Art Institute of Chicago.
Wow.
When he came back to the United States, he got a job as a map maker for TWA,
Okay.
which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
But then he really transitioned into teaching.
Okay.
So he held positions at like the Ringling School of Art,
Right.
University of Illinois, the University of Detroit, the University of Utah.
That's a pretty typical career trajectory, I think, for a lot of artists. You know, you
Well,
come up through formal training,
Yeah.
international exposure,
Yeah.
and then teaching gives them financial security,
Yeah.
but it also requires them to really think about, what are my principles? What am I going to teach
It's
this
true.
next generation?
Yeah. So speaking of teaching, let's move into his artistic philosophy and how it evolved over time.
Sure.
And so it seems like his period in Utah was a really significant time for him
Oh, okay.
because he felt like there wasn't really an appreciation for contemporary art there.
Okay.
And so he ended up at Rice University
Gotcha.
in Houston,
Okay.
where there were galleries and collectors that were much more
Right.
receptive to his work.
So, I mean, that seems like a really important move for him
Yes.
because it suggests a desire to be in a more vibrant and understanding
Yes.
artistic community.
Absolutely.
So the environment really can affect.
Your work.
Yes. And he had the St. Bambola series that he was really proud of.
Oh.
But even then, he felt like, okay, I've got to move on from this.
Right.
He wanted to turn off his myth-making machine.
Oh, wow. He said,
That's a great quote.
yeah. And I think he even said that his motto one summer was me first. So he really wanted to just explore and do his own thing.
That's the mark of a lot of great artists.
Right.
They're not content to just stay in their lane.
No.
They want to constantly be pushing those boundaries.
Exactly. And he also had some very distinct views on galleries and museums.
Okay.
He felt like there were these mutual expectations
Right.
that weren't necessarily realistic.
Okay.
He was very wary of like painting for money.
Right.
And he has this great story about a patron who wanted to pay him in sealed $100 bills in a glass tube.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he really believed that the artist should be in control
Right.
of the whole environment, of
Okay.
where the work was exhibited,
Right.
and that nothing in his show should compete
Right.
or be directly compared.
Yeah. I mean, it shows you that tension, I think, that's always present in the
Yeah.
art world between artistic integrity and the commercial realities.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
go ahead.
it's like I want to make sure
Yes.
that the viewer is having this very curated experience, not just looking at a bunch of pictures on a wall.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Well, that's really fascinating.
his core principles were really about faith and good work.
Okay.
And he really believed that stumbling blocks could be turned into stepping stones.
Right.
And he represented this visually with paintings of water jars,
Okay.
where the sediment is allowed to settle
Interesting.
so that a clearer path can be seen.
That's really powerful. I mean, that's a great metaphor
Yeah.
for both life and art
Absolutely.
to just let things settle
Yeah.
so you can see more clearly.
Yeah. And then he had his Scarecrow series,
Okay.
which was inspired by Günter Grass's novel Dog Years.
Interesting.
But these scarecrows weren't just scarecrows. They were this, like, Germanic hastening of spring.
Okay.
They're all about renewal and evolution
Right.
and metamorphosis.
Okay.
And he would use materials like lobster shells,
Okay.
larva shells.
Okay.
And he even described the scarecrows as sculptures
Interesting.
that disguise the drawing.
So there's that play again.
Yes.
Between word and image.
Yes. And he was really influenced by Tom Wolfe's The Painted Word
Right.
as well.
Yeah. I mean, the Scarecrow series just seems really rich with symbolism.
Yes.
That direct connection to Grass's literary work suggests there's a really intellectual dimension going on here.
Absolutely.
And then that disguise element
Yes.
really emphasizes his interest in challenging the viewer.
Yes. And his main aim was to involve the viewer.
Right.
So he thought of his artworks as puzzles.
Okay.
He sometimes incorporated what he called data problems.
Data problems. What's that?
So they weren't really math problems or anything,
Right.
but they were codes or elements that made you have to decode the image.
Interesting.
So as to encourage deeper engagement
Right.
and self-discovery.
Okay.
And he even described his approach as guerrilla warfare
Wow.
on a visually saturated, word-oriented culture.
So he's like actively fighting against the way we normally see things?
Yes.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he was trying to question reality,
Right.
which is very similar to the surrealists.
Right.
And so his early work in the 50s was really about social protest.
Okay.
So heavy outlines, flat colors.
Right.
And then mid-decade, he started to combine social realism and non-objectivity.
Okay.
So he's depicting human symbols.
Okay.
He was influenced by Cremoni
Okay.
and Etruscan figurines.
Okay.
And then after Italy, he started to do these large-scale drawings as ends in themselves.
Okay.
And he would incorporate corrections
Oh, wow.
into the work.
Interesting.
And you see this in The Descent from the Cross, which has all these personal symbols in it as well.
Yeah, you can just see this restless
Yes.
experimental spirit
Yes.
throughout his career. He's not afraid to
Right.
try different styles,
Okay.
different techniques
Right.
to really express what he wants to express.
Yeah. And then that idea of incorporating corrections is really fascinating to me.
It's like he's embracing imperfection.
Yes.
He's saying the process is just as important as the product.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then in the 60s, he wanted to blend like Hugo van der Goes, who had these really poetic suggestions in his work
Okay.
with Goya's emotional overtones.
Okay, so he's pulling from different
Yeah.
sources.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he started to use applied paper
Okay.
so that the paper would age over time,
Oh, wow.
which is so interesting.
So he's thinking about time
Yeah.
as a part of the piece.
Yeah. And that's evident in like a series of masks.
Gotcha.
And his color palette became more muted
Okay.
during that time.
Okay.
So it created this greater sense of harmony
Right.
with his drawings.
Yeah, it really shows you how he's not only thinking about the image,
Right.
but about the physical materials and how
Yes.
they'll change over time.
Exactly. And then in the 70s in Houston, he really wanted to transform the subjective, the decorative functions of art into the mystical.
Okay.
He really wanted to evoke subjective states of mind in the viewer.
Right.
And he explored the life cycle, metamorphosis, birth, death, regeneration.
Right.
And he was influenced by Freud,
Okay.
the Jericho Grunewald Kazantzakis Grass.
That's quite a range.
Yeah. And he has this great quote. He says, "Art is funny if you think it's serious and vice versa."
Oh, man, that's so Camblin.
Right.
He's like, don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes.
But also look for the deeper meaning in the silly stuff.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah. And then the 80s,
Fun.
he's really intertwining his drawings and watercolors.
Okay.
And he's creating these illusionistic, deep surfaces
Right.
that contain camouflaged images.
Wow.
And he wanted you to look beyond the
In
obvious
ways.
to find the sensitive craftsmanship
Right.
and the hidden meanings.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what makes his work so complex and
Yeah.
rewarding to look at. You
Yeah.
can come back to it over and over again
Right.
and discover something new.
Right. And sometimes those secrets in his paintings, they wouldn't be revealed for decades
Wow.
after they were created.
Wow. So he's like planting these little Easter eggs
Yes.
for future generations to find.
Yeah. And he was also a huge proponent of collaboration.
Okay.
So starting in 1969 in Houston,
Yeah.
he had this artistic relationship with Earl Staley and Joe Tate.
Right.
And they would create collaborative events at a place they called B&E Productions.
Interesting.
And they would do things like a tattoo show, a camping show.
Wow.
They even had a project called The Holding Firm, where they did these like
Yeah.
unconventional house renovations.
It's so interesting to me because it really challenges that traditional notion of the solitary artistic genius.
Yes.
It's like no creativity can be collective.
Right.
It can be collaborative.
Absolutely.
And it can result in these really interesting
Yeah.
cross-pollinations.
Yeah, absolutely. And he really believed in submerging the individual ego. And he would often sign his work as just anonymous
Yeah.
or anonymous artists.
Interesting.
And then in the 80s, he collaborated with Nancy Giordano on Mushas Volantes,
Okay.
which were these really intricate works made up of dots and dashes
Right.
that created these optical illusions.
It's kind of like Escher and Dali.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then his later works like his Big Owl series and then his return to Descent from the Cross.
Okay.
They really showcase his mature mastery and his
Yeah.
ability to tell stories with symbols.
Right. So it's like all of this experimentation has led up to this
Yes.
this culmination of all his
Yeah.
explorations.
Yeah, so let's talk about Breaker's Drive,
Okay.
which is this watercolor.
Yeah.
And we have this transcript of a YouTube video.
Right.
And the way they describe it, it's just so vivid.
Okay.
It's these surging waves capped with white foam,
Right.
this deep indigo and charcoal sea
Okay.
with these sharply silhouetted rocks.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, you can just almost feel the power of the ocean.
yeah, and they connected to this Zen Buddhist teaching
Oh, really?
of impermanence, which is Mujo.
Right.
And each wave is like a symbol of the fleeting nature of life.
Yeah.
And then the water's motion
Right.
represents the constant flow of existence.
Yeah.
And then you have these dark, unyielding rocks
Okay.
amidst all this turbulent water,
Right.
which suggests this still point of mindfulness.
Interesting.
So it's like this balance
Right.
between action and repose,
Right.
chaos and clarity.
Yeah. That duality, I think, is really emphasized when you consider the connection
Yeah,
that they drew to the I Ching's hexagram 29,
right,
which is the abysmal water.
right.
And it talks about how water can be dangerous,
Yeah,
but also sustaining, which is
Right.
just like life, right? And then you have these rocks
yeah.
that are like the
Yeah.
stable element in the midst of all that
Yeah.
chaos.
And they also reference that Lao Tzu quote about water wearing away rock.
Right.
And it's this paradox of water's strength in its softness.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of wu wei, which is effortless action.
Right?
And then even the luminous white foam
Right.
that's created by the crashing waves
Yeah.
can be seen as this transformative power that's constantly reshaping the landscape.
So Breaker's Drive is like more than just
Yeah.
a pretty picture of the ocean.
Yes.
It's really a metaphor for life struggles.
Yes.
How we deal with them.
Yes.
Saying that you can't just passively overcome things. You
Yeah.
have to engage with them
Yeah.
to really grow.
And it can even be seen as a parallel
Yeah.
to the creative process itself.
Absolutely.
So you have this collision of ideas and inspirations,
Yeah.
which is like the waves.
Crashing
Yeah.
and then the structure and the grounding
Right.
provided by those rocks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's really just this meditation on nature's power and how it mirrors
Yeah.
the human experience.
Right.
And they ask the viewer, how do you navigate your own Breaker's Drive moments?
How do you channel that fluid power?
Yes.
And how do you stay strong
Yeah.
like the rocks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on to his incomplete works, which is the series of books.
Okay.
It's been described as this like conversation between art and philosophy,
Yeah.
where he explores the absurd, the profound, and the overlooked aspects of life.
So he's looking at all those things that we just kind of take for granted.
Right.
And he's saying, hey, there's something here.
Yeah.
Let's take a closer look.
And he turns ordinary things into symbols.
Right.
So like a figure 4 trap represents entanglement,
Okay.
a tattooed arm,
Yeah.
unspoken history,
Right.
a frog,
Yeah.
effortless wisdom.
I love that
Yeah.
he's taking these simple things and imbuing them with this
Yeah.
deeper meaning.
Yeah, and the drawings are paradoxes made visible.
Okay.
So a trap that doesn't trap,
Right.
a structure that doesn't move,
Right.
a disappearing object that was never meant to be lost. They're like blueprints for ideas.
Right. So they're not just representations of things. They're
Oh,
like
yeah.
ideas themselves.
Yes.
Made visual.
Yeah, and he's also playing with illusion
Right.
and vanishing acts,
Right.
sleight of hand,
Yeah.
meditations on impermanence.
So he's like a magician almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's this theme of traps,
Okay.
which is really interesting. So there are the traps of fear that we set for ourselves.
Right.
The trap of time,
Yeah.
which is inescapable.
Right.
Traps that are self-made.
Right.
Traps that the world imposes on us.
Interesting.
And so each trap seems to tell a story
right.
about the people who set them,
Yeah.
escape them, or never even see them.
That's really cool.
And then in contrast to that,
Okay.
you have this theme of stillness.
Okay.
So it's enduring, refusing to break
Right.
a potential piece beyond wandering.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
And the books don't offer answers.
Right.
They just offer these questions and riddles.
So he's making you do the work.
Yeah.
And-
And the Forward to Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 1,
Okay.
is really interesting because it says that art history is basically understanding how we interpret visual things.
Right.
And so it connects realism
Right.
to abstract expressionism
Right.
and Zen Buddhism and the I Ching.
Okay.
So it's all about intuition, interconnectedness, fluidity.
Yeah. So he's really bringing together
Yes.
all these different strands of thought
Yes.
into his work.
Yes. And Camblin blends abstraction and symbolic motifs.
Right.
So he's merging this ancient wisdom
Yeah.
with modern art.
Right.
And it's really about using art as this portal to a heightened awareness.
Right.
Where you're prompted to really contemplate
Right.
what you're looking at.
So it's not just passive viewing.
Right.
He wants you to actively think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the artwork becomes this catalyst for self-inquiry.
Right.
And it illuminates these hidden parts of your psyche.
Yeah.
And there's also this really cyclical perspective
Yeah.
that mirrors this idea of impermanence
Right.
that we've been talking about.
Nothing stays the same.
Exactly.
Everything changes.
Yeah. And the way you interpret it
Right.
is this really personal dialogue.
Right.
It's silent.
Right.
And it's not about giving you instructions.
Yeah.
It's about giving you metaphors.
Right.
And then you come to your own understanding.
Yeah.
And you re-examine your feelings and your assumptions about the world.
So it's a journey of
It's-
self-discovery.
Exactly. And so that's really the aim of the books, is to help you explore psychologically
Right.
and grow spiritually.
Okay.
But it's not going to give you the answers.
Right.
It's going to give you these timeless symbols, and then you have to kind of figure it out.
Okay.
So let's finish up by looking at some quotes
Sure.
about his legacy.
Yeah.
So Pete Gershon calls him a mystical trickster figure, ripe for rediscovery.
I like that.
And Giorgio Jackson Jr. saw his art as this portal to experiencing art like you were reading a book,
Oh.
filled with references and meanings.